United States. The United States was one of the two primary superpowers of the Cold War, shaping global politics through its leadership of the Western capitalist bloc. Its foreign policy centered on containing communism, promoting liberal democracy, and maintaining a global network of alliances like NATO, ANZUS, and various bilateral military partnerships. The U.S. used economic power, military presence, covert operations, and cultural influence to counter the spread of Soviet and Chinese communism. Major strategies included the Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan, and a series of interventions in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. American military involvement in Korea and Vietnam defined much of the era's conflict, while nuclear deterrence and arms competition with the USSR shaped global security. Throughout the period, the United States positioned itself as the defender of free world values, capitalism, and international stability. Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was the dominant communist superpower of the Cold War and the primary antagonist to the United States. Emerging from World War II as a heavily militarized and ideologically driven state, it sought to expand Marxist-Leninist influence across the world. Under Joseph Stalin, the USSR established tight control over Eastern Europe, installing loyal socialist governments and creating the Warsaw Pact to secure its strategic buffer zone. Stalin's legacy included centralized authority, a command economy, and mistrust of Western powers, shaped the Cold War's earliest confrontations and continued to influence Soviet policy long after his death. The USSR invested heavily in nuclear weapons, space technology, and global revolutionary movements, supporting communist parties, insurgencies, and socialist governments in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Throughout the Cold War, the Soviet Union positioned itself as the vanguard of world socialism, competing with the West for global leadership and ideological dominance until its collapse in 1991. China. China emerged as an independent communist power during the Cold War, following the 1949 victory of the Chinese Communist Party under Mao Zedong. Initially aligned closely with the Soviet Union, China received economic aid, military support, and ideological guidance during its early socialist transformation. However, by the late 1950s, political disagreements, border tensions, and contrasting visions of global revolution led to the Sino-Soviet split, creating a distinct third pole in Cold War geopolitics. China positioned itself as the champion of anti-colonial movements and rural-based revolutionary struggle, supporting insurgencies in Asia, Africa, and beyond. Domestically, radical campaigns such as the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution reshaped society and influenced its foreign posture. China also engaged in major conflicts, including the Korean War and border clashes with India and the USSR. In the 1970s, it shifted toward a strategic opening with the United States, balancing against Soviet power. By the end of the Cold War, China stood as a unique communist state pursuing its own ideological and national interests. Western Bloc. The Western Bloc was the alliance of capitalist, democratic nations aligned politically, economically, and militarily with the United States throughout the Cold War. This coalition formed around shared interests in safeguarding market economies, representative government, international trade, and global stability. At its core was NATO, which connected the United States, Canada, and Western Europe through a system of collective defense and coordinated military planning. Beyond Europe, the bloc included allies in Asia and the Pacific, such as Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, along with numerous pro-Western governments across Latin America and the Middle East. The Western Bloc responded to post-war instability through economic initiatives like the Marshall Plan, strengthening democratic institutions and preventing political extremism from taking root. Its states cooperated in intelligence sharing, technological development, and global diplomatic strategy. Throughout the Cold War, the Western Bloc positioned itself as the champion of the free world, promoting open markets, containing communist expansion, and shaping much of the international order that followed. Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact was the principal military alliance of the Eastern Bloc, created in 1955 as a direct counterpart to NATO. It united the Soviet Union with its Eastern European satellite states, East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and initially Albania, under a single framework of collective defense and centrally coordinated military planning. Although officially presented as an alliance of sovereign socialist nations, the pact was heavily dominated by the Soviet Union, which controlled strategic decisions, stationed troops across member territories, and used the alliance to maintain political discipline. The Warsaw Pact served both as a military shield and as a mechanism for enforcing ideological unity, intervening when governments drifted from Soviet Union's direction, most famously in Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. Throughout the Cold War, it embodied the structure of the Eastern Bloc, providing the USSR with a strategic buffer zone and a unified front against NATO. The pact gradually weakened in the late 1980s and ultimately dissolved in 1991 as communist regimes collapsed across Eastern Europe. US-backed. The US-backed category refers to the wide range of governments, political movements, and military forces supported by the United States as part of its global strategy to contain communism during the Cold War. These groups were not necessarily democratic or ideologically aligned with American values. Rather, they were seen as strategic partners in countering Soviet influence. US-backed states included South Korea, South Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and numerous Latin American and Middle Eastern regimes. Beyond formal governments, the United States supported anti-communist insurgencies and paramilitary organizations, such as the Contras in Nicaragua, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and various right-wing factions across Africa and Southeast Asia. American backing ranged from military aid, weapons, training, and intelligence support to economic assistance and diplomatic protection. Through these alliances, U.S. extended its influence into critical regions, shaped political outcomes, and turned local conflicts into significant Cold War flashpoints. Together, U.S.-backed forces formed a global network resisting socialist and Soviet-aligned movements. Soviet-backed. The Soviet-backed category refers to the many governments, parties, and revolutionary movements worldwide that aligned themselves with the Soviet Union's ideological and geopolitical objectives during the Cold War. These groups embraced socialist or Marxist-Leninist principles and relied on Soviet Union for military support, economic assistance, training, and political legitimacy. Soviet-backed states included countries like Cuba, Vietnam, Angola, Ethiopia, Laos, Mongolia, and South Yemen, each integrating elements of centralized planning, one-party rule, and close diplomatic ties with the USSR. Beyond established governments, the Soviet Union supported numerous liberation movements and communist guerrilla organizations across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, such as the MPLA in Angola, the PDPA in Afghanistan, and various leftist groups seeking to overturn colonial or Western-backed regimes. This support often transformed local conflicts into Cold War battlegrounds. Soviet backing typically involved arms shipments, military advisors, intelligence cooperation, and occasionally direct intervention. As seen in Afghanistan together, these Soviet-aligned forces expanded the USSR's influence far beyond Eastern Europe and defined much of the global ideological competition. Non-aligned. The non-aligned movement, NAM, consisted of countries that sought to remain independent from both the US-led Western Bloc and the Soviet-led Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. Formally established in 1961, the movement was shaped by leaders such as Yugoslavia's Josip Broz Tito, India's Jawaharlal Nehru, Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, Indonesia's Sukarno, and Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. These states rejected formal alignment with either superpower, emphasizing national sovereignty, anti-colonial solidarity, and the right to pursue independent political, economic, and diplomatic paths. The non-aligned movement represented a diverse group, including socialist states, monarchies, democracies, and newly independent nations from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. While many members cooperated with one bloc or the other when beneficial, the movement provided a collective voice for countries resisting Cold War polarization. NAM advocated for economic development, decolonization, peaceful coexistence, and opposition to foreign military alliances or intervention. Over time, it became the largest international grouping outside the United Nations, significantly shaping global diplomacy and South-South cooperation throughout the Cold War.